Hello, it's Michael Watts here, and in this episode of Luthier Stories, I'm talking to a man without whose work the world of the bespoke steel-string acoustic guitar as we know it would be a much poorer and very different place. I'm talking, of course, of my dear friend, Ervin Somogyi. Mm-hmm. Hello, Ervin.
Hello, Michael. Nice to be here with you.
It's lovely to be here with you. It really is.
It's been a while.
It has. It's best part of a decade since we first met, and I think the last time I saw you was that in Brighton.
Mm-hmm.
When you came to visit. So,
indeed, yes.
Yeah, several years ago. Ervin, there are things that I want to talk to you about. And obviously a lot of this is just going to be us catching up. But inevitably there will be some sort of factual content as well. I think we can't really avoid that, can we?
Actually want factual content?
Well, we could try.
All right, fine.
Unless you just want to go for downright lies and hyperbole. I mean, that's just as well.
No, I always do that.
Let's do something different. So, one of the things I want to talk to you about is a guitar that you designed, which I've got to be completely frank with you, it changed my life as a player. And that is the Modified Dreadnought, an example of which I'm holding right now. I'd like, if you wouldn't mind, to learn a bit more about its creation.
It's an interesting story, I think, although it didn't seem as interesting in the moment as it does in retrospect. Mm-hmm. But as I've mentioned before, I had been making steel string guitars for a few years. And I'd gotten to the point that I was making guitars that were good enough that people would actually want to play them and buy them, which was a huge step forward.
Big step. Yeah.
I'd say there were two milestone events. Mm-hmm. The initial one was back in about 1970. I had known someone who had made his own guitar using Irving Sloane's seminal book.
Right, yes, of course.
And since I had time and I'd been playing guitar since high school, it occurred to me that, well, I could make one. Mm-hmm. So I got some woods, I got a few tools, very basic. I made a workbench out of half of a ping pong table. And, I spent a year puttering and sanding and shaping and shaving and this, that, and the other. And I got a decent guitar out of it. Mm-hmm. I was making my living at that point by playing guitar in restaurants, coffee houses, mm-hmm. this, that, and the other. It was at that point in my career, quote unquote, that I discovered that I really don't have what it takes to be a professional musician. Right. The difference being that a professional will play well if he feels like it or not. In my case, I played well when I felt like it, and when I didn't feel like it, my playing reflected it. Right. It's not professional. But in that period, friends of mine who knew I'd made a guitar started to bring guitars to me to do something to, or repair, or tweak, or fix, or adjust. And to my surprise, they paid me for that. This is guitar number 18, the 18th guitar I ever made. It was bought a long time ago. I bought it back from the guy who'd bought it because he was no longer playing guitar. My thinking being that I could restore it and maybe even improve it, mm-hmm. and maybe write an article about it because it's, sort of historically interesting. This was very early on. This is not exactly work that's going to be sought by museums, but it was an attempt on my part to spread my wings and broaden my repertoire. So there's the peg head with a proprietary design, which is characteristic of Spanish guitars. Whereas steel string guitars typically have a, very plain peg head that's shaped by a router or something, and maybe mother of pearl inlays put into it or something. But this was something that I came up with that I liked at the time. So my guitars had this particular crowning feature, if I could put it like that, until I decided that I didn't like it that much, and I switched over. So this is a very traditional Spanish guitar style element. Again, I was making a transition from making those kinds of instruments. So this is a 12-fret neck,
Yes.
which is typical of Spanish guitars. This is a mosaic rosette,
Yes,
which
indeed,
is
yes.
characteristic of Spanish guitars.
Once again.
And it's a Spanish guitar diameter sound hole, which is not characteristic of steel string guitars, but that's what I knew. And it actually sort of kind of shaped like a classical guitar, in spite of the fact that this is going to be a steel string one. It's sort of a wannabe classic in a way. And of course it has the classic heel.
Right.
And I had no idea what I was doing bracing wise, so I did what you see in there right now, which is not what I'm doing these days, but that's something that occurred to me that I could do and get away with. And I'm undecided as to whether to leave it and tweak it or replace it with something, I don't know, more modern. But I think I'd be interested in keeping the historical authenticity of this going,
Of course.
by not changing it radically. Clean up the workmanship, the detail work, refinish it, all that kind of stuff. But not to mess with the construction all that much.
Now we've got maple on the back and sides.
Yes.
Was that a conscious choice or something that you...
Oh, I don't know. I really didn't know what I was doing back in those days. It was wood. It was good enough.
Absolutely.
And it was figured, it was flamed, so I liked that. I knew enough by then that I was aware that steel string guitars sometimes are made out of maple. Very seldom is that true of classical guitars.
And that's your first label as well.
This is a label I was using back in those days. This is the back. The braces all have fallen off. This guitar was in disrepair when I got it back. But, that was sort of the kind of work I was doing back in those days. If you look at this closely, the workmanship is kind of clunky. But, as I said, before 1977, I wasn't really paying close attention to that. Where were we?
You were going to put your hat on for the sake of continuity.
Oh. I'll do anything for continuity. It's our most important consideration.
It really is.
In 1977, 5 years after I had sort of officially established myself, I got invited to participate as an exhibiting luthier at the Carmel Classic Guitar Festival, which was a big deal. It was very prestigious. People came from all over the country to attend this event. Renowned musicians were invited to play and concertize. They came from other countries and Europe as well to attend this. So it was a pretty big deal. And, interestingly enough, my friends throughout that period had been unfailingly supportive of all my efforts. Gosh, that's nice, lovely, whoa, good for you. You built that, fabulous. So I went to the Carmel Classic Guitar Festival with a bit of a cocky attitude because I thought, well, how could I fail to impress these people? Well, I found out how I could fail to impress them, because my guitars were quite literally the worst at in the exhibition hall. They were clunky. The workmanship was adequate, maybe indifferent. The sound, those guys were making guitars that sounded much better than mine. I knew that because I was a guitar player.
Right.
And innocents would come by my table and ask perfectly reasonable questions like, why is your bridge off center?
Right, yes.
So
That's a good question.
So the gist of that was that I really had failed to pay attention to the details. I thought, well, of course it would be okay. And I hadn't received any feedback, any constructive criticism until then. And I left that particular event very depressed because my world just crashed around me. And it became very clear to me that I'd been living out some hippie fantasy, which is okay, but that's not really what I thought I'd been doing. But that is indeed what my work amounted to. And it was clear to me that I had a choice of either buckling down and doing good work or bailing out and doing something else.
Which doesn't sound like you anyway.
Well, it was a watershed period for me, it turns out, because, I mean, it truly was depressing to me. I just didn't know what hit me. I know
that feeling, yeah, absolutely.
I just didn't know what had hit me. But it was in the weeks following that it came to me that, wait a minute, I really like doing this. I really want to do better work. That's when my career started.
Right.
In 1977.
Tell me a little bit about this instrument,
This is from 1978. You can see that the work had evolved in those 4 years. Most importantly, this was done after my fiasco of 1977.
It's worth pointing out that this guitar is currently in the process of being restored. Isn't it? Hence,
we're just stripping the finish off it because it needs to be refinished. It's got some structural work that needs to be patched up, but it's mostly in good shape. And I'm also gonna, as part of all that, do some revoicing through the sound hole.
Right.
Now this is it's a 14 fret neck, which again is moving more in the direction of what steel string guitars are expected to be. This still has a classical rosette type mosaic design, although different. It's a 4-inch diameter sound hole, which is more in keeping. And this is a feature of Spanish guitars, the fingerboard hugging the contours of the sound hole.
Yes, indeed.
It's traditional. The industrial model that most of the commercial manufacturers follow is one in which you make the body, you stick the neck on, then you put the fingerboard on, and the fingerboard can end up here someplace, and that's easy to do because if you do this, the fingerboard really has to be centered. You have to be careful because if it's not, then one or another of these beards is larger or smaller. If this is off center, it looks really bad. So this already conforms to a lot of the normal things one would see on a steel string guitar, but with my own sort of touch. This is Brazilian rosewood. It's a rather nice piece.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm just looking at it now thinking, you don't find that anymore, do you?
It's really hard, and it's very expensive to find any wood like that.
And this headstock is a lot closer to what you...
This is segueing in the direction of what I'm doing now. I want to modify this also. The one that I sport on my guitars these days is much more crisp and elegant and stuff. So I want to do that. But it's, I've abandoned or moved on from that design to something that, I don't know, just worked better for me. A lot of my work has grown out of a style or a technique in which I've spent a lot of time with the guitar, and just sort of, I don't know, paid attention to this or that. Now, the average steel string guitar, whether it's a cutaway or not, has a curve here.
Right.
Between the heel and the neck. A curve that corresponds to the perimeter of a 4-inch diameter circle. Mm. They all do that. If you go to a guitar show, it's 4-inch diameter, 4-inch diameter, 4-inch diameter. It's sort of standard and traditional. And the reason for that is that that's the smallest radius curve you can make with the front roller of the typical belt sander, which is a 4-inch diameter roller. Mm-hmm. You have a neck blank and you put it on the sander and bzzz.
That's it, it's done.
It's done. Mm. However,
that's not what's happening here, though, is it?
Well, I think that's not the best design. If you are attempting to make a cutaway, the only purpose of which is to allow the left hand a higher reach, why put an obstacle to the thumb here?
Well, exactly.
Because otherwise the thumb would be out here, and it would lessen the effectiveness of the cutaway. Not to mention, a lot of cutaways only give you 2 extra frets clearance before they start to flare out. And this is 1, 2, 3, going on 4. Mm-hmm. It's a more effective cutaway.
Absolutely. You can get right in there, even up to there.
Right. So that's an element of thoughtful design, as far as I'm concerned. The steel string guitars, by and large, there's more creativity and inventiveness in them. Now, many of the designs crash and burn, but nonetheless, some very nice stuff comes out that is really not acceptable to meddle with in the world of the classical guitar. That's very formal, and there are things that, well, you just don't do. You don't put a cutaway into a classical guitar. You don't put a position marker. You keep the rosette simple and elegant. You don't go overboard on inlays. I discovered that there is a hierarchy of standards that one is expected to meet in that world that I was unprepared for. Not only that, but since the students in that modality will have gone through lessons, classes, training, mentorship, studies, long hours of practicing, this, that, and the other, they will have absorbed a sense of what a guitar should be, and the right holding position, the right fingering positions, and they will have absorbed a lot of the disciplines of working in that world. And for people who are approaching them, their attitude, since they carry this educational load, they will consider themselves, whether they think of it that way or not, as guardians of and spokesmen for the correct designs. They are not open to variations in those things. So I've had the experience of showing a guitar that I spent many hours constructing. Granted, it might not have been the best guitar, but I put myself out for that. And I would present it to a classical guitar player, one of the local luminaries, and he'd play it desultorily, if I could say that. And he'd say, your B string is weak.
Oh, good God.
Well, that's
imagine being told that
not
at a
really
tender
helpful,
age.
you know. The experience I had with the steel string guitar players was really different.
Right.
I would, show them a guitar that I'd made, and they'd say, wow, you made that? Far out! God, that's really great! So, it's not a tough choice to decide which group to spend more time with.
Yeah.
In those days, the model for what a steel string guitar should be and had to be was pretty much the Martin guitar, or the Martin line of guitars. Yeah. Now, classical guitar makers had their own sacred model. The size and shape and proportions have not changed very much over the years. In those days, the size, shape, and proportions of the models the Martin Company was making were set and had become almost set in stone. They were standards.
Absolutely.
And the most popular steel string guitar in that time was the Martin Dreadnought. Yeah. Now, that had been designed way before, primarily for musicians who stood when they played. Mm-hmm. They were playing folk music, bluegrass music, whatever, but standing maybe around the microphone with the strap around their shoulders. So things like the physical balance of the instrument, the size, the shape, didn't really matter all that much. And everybody was happy with that. In the mid-1970s, the Windham Hill phenomenon appeared. And what that was a group of people who liked the guitar, loved the guitar, but they didn't play it with a plectrum. They played with their fingers.
Exactly.
So these became known as the finger stylists as opposed to the flat pickers. This was a new phenomenon. Not a lot of music had been written for the guitar until then. Until then, very largely, fiddle tunes and other melodies had been adapted to the guitar.
That's right.
I mean, some people wrote their own lyrics.
But there wasn't an established repertoire.
No, there really wasn't.
The steel
There really wasn't. Until the finger pickers came along, and they started, quote, writing music for the steel string guitar. And one of the principal mechanical differences between these uses of the guitar and the former uses was that these people sat when they played. So the word spread that I sort of knew what I was doing, and people who had been or were about to record for the Windham Hill label started to seek me out because they needed guitars that performed well in the studio. And I might have mentioned before that the standard models made up until then, they're okay, but they never really played in tune. And the finger pickers needed guitars that played in tune all the way up and down the neck.
Right.
A lot of the other people, they were happy making chords in first position and close to that. But these people were playing, and by the time their hand was up here, they could hear the dissonances, and that wasn't going to work in the studio.
Well, Windham Hill especially was the first time that the steel string acoustic guitar had been recorded with such close scrutiny and such purity.
Yes, indeed. Good quality sound.
Yeah.
Very good quality sound. So they wanted guitars that played in tune and that played evenly, that the response spectrum was not lacking in some department. My focus on that came a bit later, but first I did the intonation work. And then Daniel Hecht, one of the players, approached me. A wonderful guy. He'd already made 2 recordings then for smaller labels, but he finagled to get a recording contract with Windham Hill. And he came to me and he said that he had to fight his guitar too much when he played. Now, he had a Dreadnought, and besides the fact that it hadn't been designed for people who sat when they played, or rather an outgrowth of that fact, was that the Dreadnought, as you know, had sort of very gentle curves. It's sort of a boxy look.
That's right. Kind of almost a rectangle, really, isn't it?
Closer to that than the canonic Spanish guitar, which has these voluptuous feminine lines. But the guitar would slip and slide around on his lap when he got going, and the center of balance was not good because the peg head kept on wanting to fall over, and he had to fight it. So he wanted a guitar that he didn't have to fight. Now, I'd never done anything like that before, but I listened to him, and I agreed to make him a guitar. And I came up with a design, an altered design for what had been the Dreadnought. This was a Dreadnought-sized sound box, but reshaped so it had a more definite waist that would sit on the lap, and the center of gravity, the center of balance was higher up, so the physical balance was better. And I try to pay attention to the acoustic and dynamic elements, the working of the top and the bracing. One thing about Daniel Heck that impressed me is he'd had formal musical training. He'd gone to a conservatory. And he had a sense of musicality and timbre and dynamic range that he could articulate. And he'd say, listen to this. Can you hear that? See how flat that sounds? I want something that's got more sparkle.
Right.
Or when I play this passage here, first I play it loud and then I echo it, playing it more softly. And I want a guitar that will keep up with me when I do that.
Absolutely.
So I took that in and built him a guitar. I sweated blood on that guitar. I mean, I really thought and worked as hard as I could. Evidently, I hit the nail on the head because he was very happy with the result. And a new model of guitar was born.
Michael Hedges used one of your instruments for Breakfast in the Field. Was there a relationship with Michael? Did you spend time together? Did you know him?
Some. He had been trained at the Peabody Conservatory.
That's right, yes.
And actually was very adept musically, and had segued into, these sort of non-conservatory type music that he got known for, which included different ways of handling the guitar and getting sounds out of it, which became wildly popular.
Oh, absolutely.
He was, I have to say, a really electrifying presence on stage. When he got on stage, wow, he was really on, in a way that a lot of people aren't. But he was a showman, and dynamic, and all kinds of good stuff.
Your guitars often feature extraordinary ornamentation. I mean, this is a prime example. This is the 500th instrument that you made, the Diospyros. And as you can see, it's quite involved.
Yeah, it took a lot of doing. The factory model that has dominated the making of the guitar, one of its prime values is efficiency. You want to get the thing done quickly,
Absolutely.
Efficaciously. You don't want to squander time by doing fancy this or that, unless it's a special model that, carries a higher price. I was free from that particular restraint or constraint, because who was I kidding? I was making these things by hand. There's no way I was going to make anything quickly. And I've always liked to putter, to play with ideas, to notice that, that's nice. Maybe I could do something like that here. And I do, besides having had this impulse to just play with visual elements, I've got a really good eye. And some things grab my eye and seem to me to be really beautiful or right. as opposed to wrong or clumsy or missing the mark or something.
Sure.
Now, I didn't know what to do about any of that for a long time, except I did stuff that I like the look of.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, other people would too, I guess. But over time, I learned that there are reasons why certain things look good that are not taught in guitar making schools.
That's very
They
true.
might be taught in schools of art, but guitar makers don't go to those schools.
Very rarely.
So I sort of figured out that, you know, if I put this thing here and I put this thing over here, it's not going to be quite right. But if I put it here, it just looks better.
Absolutely.
So I sort of followed my own lead, my instincts, again, without a whole lot of input from anybody else. And I still do.
You've told me in the past that you have taken inspiration from, exactly as you just said, things that have caught your eye. It could be the floor of a Mexican restaurant, which inspired the tile pattern in your andamento guitar. You showed me a picture of a cobbled street that formed part of
That
the...
inspired that.
Yes.
I saw that image and I just liked it. Years ago, I had a relationship with a woman, and we went down to Puerto Vallarta for a week. A sort of an exotic getaway thing. And I hadn't really known her that well until then, but okay, so that seemed like a good thing to do. This may or may not make any sense to you, but during that trip, I found that I really didn't like her very much.
Oh, no.
And so I spent a lot of time just walking around Puerto Vallarta, because we weren't, you know, doing anything together that was fun. And if you just notice the patterns of the cobbles on the streets, the wrought iron work on the doors and windows and on the fences, the lines of this or that, which I did, I thought, wow, those are really nice. I had a good time doing that. I had a better time doing that than hanging out with her. We keep on making discoveries, scientific discoveries, about all kinds of just astonishing little things that throughout history no one knew before. But they were there all the time. Just we never got around to noticing them. Well, I found the same processes in my work with this, because everything I know about the guitar, and I think I could say I know a lot because I've written 2 books about that, and I'm writing another one. But the thing I have sort of encapsulated in a way that I could maybe pass on to others is this little piece of wisdom.
Iroquois.
The Iroquois. This is actually quite profound, I think, because everything you need to know is right in front of you. Literally, it's all there. The information, the principles, the behaviors, the patterns, it's all there already, waiting in the air for someone to notice it. I have a guitar top that I'll put on some guitars sometime. It has very, very, very tight grain. It's not the wood I'd usually pick to build with, because I've learned how to work with wood with fewer grain length per inch. But this was, wow, really something. Now, in the 8-inch wide piece that will become the book-matched plate, I counted 540 grain lines.
Wow.
So that slice of the tree, which of course came from a larger tree, was alive well before the Declaration of Independence was signed, before Columbus discovered America. I mean, wow. None of us can claim anything like that kind of accomplishment. I'm not unaware of those things.
I'd argue that you are far more aware, and you have a more in-depth reverence and appreciation of natural materials than many people I've met that are working with them.
I do have respect for these slabs of wood. I've seen the guitar evolve, and it will continue to evolve, and I don't really know what's going to happen 20 years from now. There may be guitars far better than this, but no, I think this is my children. They're treasures. They're precious, and I really want to do the best I can with each of them. Basically, that speaks to my metaphysic, and I'm not sure this is exactly where you wanted to go in these discussions.
Exactly where I wanted to go.
Oh, okay.
Of course.
All right.
Or you can talk to anybody about bracing patterns and neck dimensions and whether a slotted headstock increases the break angle of the nut.
Yeah, I don't know about any of that stuff.
One of the things that I think is extremely revealing when you look at the work of a guitar maker is you get a sense of not just experience, but intent that goes into a guitar. What is your intent when you're building?
I'm trying to leave something beautiful in a world in which I've seen an enormous lack of that.